Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Just waiting for a few more participants to drop into the call here. But thank you so much, whether you're dialing in from early in the UK or from late in Australia. Welcome, welcome, and thank you for being there for our inaugural International Scaling Series session, focusing on Australia and the UK. Opportunities for fintechs in the Australian market and the UK market, for market entry, for partnerships, for collaboration, and for hopefully global success in the future. We're delighted at Innovate Finance to launch this series with our partners, the Australian Trade Commission and Investment Commission, AusTrade, and this inaugural session focusing on Australia. It's been a long time coming, and we're very pleased to be here. So good morning to everyone. My name is Peter Canane. I am the Director of International and National Initiatives here at Innovate Finance. Hopefully most of you know us, but for those of you that don't, Innovate Finance is of course the UK's preeminent trade organisation for the global fintech sector based here in the UK. And we're here today very much as a facilitator to ensure that those of you on the call that want to engage and learn with our panel are able to do so, and to encourage everyone on the call, panelists included, to think about the importance of the UK as a hub for international connectivity with fintech, today focusing, of course, on our partnership with Australia. And the importance, of course, of the role of international hubs and organisations such as those represented here today in terms of boosting our global ecosystem for fintech and creating the opportunities for our businesses to scale and succeed. We've seen some great news here in the UK in the last week or two. Scale of investment into the UK ecosystem, 5.7 billion US dollars so far this year, surpassing prior year totals for 2020 and 2019 already. We've also had the great news and recent announcements from Revolut and the listing news from Wise and Lend Invest in recent weeks as well. So it is the UK's time, it's popping here. But we want to obviously share that experience and encourage our partners in Australia to look to the UK, and for UK businesses to look globally to Australia to build out those links and encourage further international cooperation and take advantage of the time for fintech. And now is the time to take advantage of the situation we find ourselves in. I think if we could all agree, it's been an awful 16, 17 months now for society and for the economy at large in this pandemic. But as we come out of the pandemic, there is an increased role for the digitalization of our financial services. The recent Khalifa review pointed to how, international competitiveness was important. It's a key area for the UK to build upon our existing capacity and the sector leadership that we have here, but also to collectively create more opportunities and seek those partnerships internationally moving forward. And Innovate Finance is very keen to steer our community towards those opportunities, which will hopefully result in future trade deals, supporting existing trade deals and new trade deals as they come online, and preparing all our businesses for opportunities into new markets. The purpose of the session today, as I said, is to support our businesses, to workshop with our businesses as they seek to scale. And the scaling series, which we're kicking off this summer, will focus on the practical steps for our businesses to take to enter overseas markets and ensure that they are best prepared for what they will find. And in terms of the UK side, and we're looking to support what we can do on a regulatory front, to work with regulators in all markets, to continue to seek closer alignment on regulatory cooperation, and ultimately strengthen the global ecosystem, enabling closer working between markets. We need business organisations such as all those represented on this call and businesses such as Innovate Finance to support those opportunities for partnership, and we'll continue to work with key policymakers around the world to facilitate this. I'm going to hand over to Andy Thompson in a moment from AusTrade, who will lead our panel, and we have a great panel this morning, which I'll leave him to introduce. But the session will work in 3 blocks, which we will focus on in market entry, partnerships and collaboration and opportunities for UK FinTechs in the Australian market. And I encourage all of you on the call to think about any questions that you might have and to get engaged. And we'll close with some key remarks from Philippa Martinelli, who's the FinTech specialist at DIT. I'm very pleased that Philippa is also able to join us this morning. And I want to thank all our panelists, all the companies they represent, AusTrade and DIT, for being here today, and particularly to the AusTrade team and my colleagues at Innovate Finance for making this possible. Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Good morning, everyone. I'll be very brief before we get going and introduce you to the excellent panel we have this morning. So the Australian Trade Investment Commission is, I guess if you think this has been the Australian equivalent of DIT, the UK Department for International Trade. So in the UK, our office in Australia House in London, the main focus really is working with UK companies who are looking to partner and to invest and enter the Australian market. And for many, Australia can be a great stepping stone into the wider region. That's something which we'll perhaps touch on later today. Going the other way, we also work very closely with colleagues in Australia and our international network to support Australian companies who are entering the UK market. And in FinTech particularly, we've seen some great success stories going both ways. If I think of UK companies, Revolut, obviously we have on the call today, Record Sure, companies like Go Cardless, Rails Bank, 10X, and a number of others. Ourselves and Department for International Trade and other colleagues have been able to help in the last few years. So hopefully today, this is very much an interactive session. So please, as we go along, if there's any questions, please shout out. We're going to cover some quite wide areas. Market entry in itself is a big topic and big area and discussion point. Partnerships and collaboration, which for many as it is a mechanism and a catalyst for entering the market. And then more specific to UK companies, what are the opportunities in Australia for UK FinTechs? What are the subsectors? Where's the growth? And examples of trends and patterns which we've seen over the last year. We've got about an hour, so we'll kick off shortly. And first of all, just to introduce you to the panel, we've got Matt Baxby of Revolut, who's Revolut's country head. We have Ian Polari, who heads up KPMG's FinTech practice. We have Joanne Smith from Record Sure, and also Jonathan Hatch from ASIC. ASIC, for those of you who don't know, is the Australian equivalent of the FCA. So again, thank you all for joining. We will very much, this is an interactive session, so please feel free to ask questions. And we've got about an hour, so we're looking to wrap up around 9:45. So thank you, everyone. And again, thank you, Peter, and Innovate Finance. We look forward to working with you in what we hope will be a number of events and activities over the next year. So just to kick off then, the broad topic of market entry. Now, in our role, we've worked to assist a number of companies from SMEs to multinationals. And obviously this is a key area, and it's for many, particularly SMEs, it's a big one and a big challenge, and hopefully we can address some of the points today. I guess we're fortunate that Australia, in terms of regulation and compliance and the general business environment, isn't too dissimilar to the UK, and that definitely helps. So just to kick things off, I might ask Joanne, just from your work with Record Sure, I think Australia might be right, or I may be wrong, you might have to correct me, is the first market you guys have entered as a startup regtech. And I just wondered if you could perhaps elaborate on that and just talk to us about some of the challenges you faced and how you went about entering the market, because I think your model has been quite different to Revolut, who we'll hear from in a minute. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Absolutely. Australia was the first market that we entered into, and it's largely because we are a regtech technology business that helps organisations deal with some of the challenges created around financial services. Australia had a particular interesting Royal Commission, which meant that they had to go back and look at past business that had been written within the financial services industry, and our technology helps with that. So there was a natural platform for us, for Record Sure, to actually go into the Australian market. Not quite a burning platform, but a platform nonetheless. So there's a real market fit. And as you say, Andy, we did things slightly differently. We were fortunate enough to meet up with KPMG, both here in Australia and in the UK. And KPMG had organised a study tour for as one of the major Australian banks to come and have a look at UK FinTech market, what was happening, what was hot, what was not in the remediation space. And they saw our product and said, actually, we've been building something similar for a year. We think you're much farther ahead. So what we'd like to do is partner, and it just goes to that point about partner and collaboration. Come over to Australia in the next 2 weeks, and we will take you round all of the requisite banks and organizations, and we'll show them what you've got to see whether this will fit in the market. And that was an amazing couple of weeks, because we got to see the reaction that the industry would have on our products. So it was almost like a baptism of fire, but backed by KPMG and the might of KPMG. So it worked really well, and I think 3 or 4 months later, we had a global partnership arrangement signed with them, and the rest is history. And we're now working with a number of organisations with KPMG to provide the solution for the remediation of the Royal Commission. So I'm sure Ian, by the way, will touch more eloquently about what they do, but it's been really helpful for us as an organisation, and one I would certainly recommend for other organisations thinking about moving into the Australian market. Think about your partners, think about how you can shortcut some of the challenges that I guess a startup fintech scale-up business would normally have, because if you are walking the floors of the organisations that you want to sell to, without having feet on the ground, it really helps to have the MITO partnership behind you.
That's great. Thanks, Joanne. And Matt, I guess with Revolut, it's a slightly different story. And also, I guess, you're more of a B2C player. I just wondered if you could elaborate. I know you weren't there in the very early days, but how you guys have gone about things, and particularly now, because you're looking to launch and grow across Australia.
Someone's on mute.
Oh, hello. Hi, Matt. We might move on. Well, we've lost Matt. Might move on to Ian. If you could mention, I mean, Joanne mentioned briefly about the.
I'm sorry, Andy, were you pausing for Matt, or would you like me to?
Oh, sorry, I thought we lost camera. Yeah, thanks, Ian. That'd be great if you could. Just to, I guess, and also for you guys working with startups, because being a big entity like KPMG, it can be a challenge, I guess. And how do you approach that, really? Yeah,
look, I perhaps was fortunate or otherwise. 6 years ago, I was asked to establish a community of interest at the time across KPMG globally on the back of some work that I'd done for the government here at the time, probably the formative sort of study into this thing called FinTech. That was 2014. And so I remember at the time there were sort of half a dozen firms of KPMG globally. Today, we now have partners and staff in more than 50 countries around the world. We're working with 70% of the top 100 FinTech companies globally. But I would say unashamedly, most of our focus is working with incumbents. And that's because they typically have the deepest pockets and the biggest problems. So, that's a reality. Look, and the thing that we do focus on are sort of players with a unique capability, and certainly we found that in a partner like Recordsure, but equally those that are somewhat tried and tested. Certainly the UK has a real depth in certain subsectors of fintech. I might come back to Recordsure. I guess just generally when we've advised organisations on market entry, particularly offshore, I do think it is typically pretty hard when you haven't proven yourself in your own market. And so there's some legitimate questions around, if you move too early, I think without sort of proof points, the obvious question is, why have you traveled halfway around the world to get a foothold in the market? I typically look for some signal of success in the domestic market. And the other thing I would say, and I think you were about to sort of obviously ask Matt, given Revolut has more of a B2C proposition and focus versus the B2B proposition of Recordsure. I mean, the subsectors of fintech in of themselves, and there are many, obviously now, it's a broad church, which we call fintech. Some of them are clearly inherently more local in disposition, and others are more inherently global. And certainly payments companies are a good example of ability to scale, relatively low customer acquisition costs. The regulatory barriers are a lot less than if you're starting a deposit-taking franchise. And so I think it is important to understand what sector or subsector of the fintech landscape you're looking to play in, and what natural barriers occur. I mean, if you're obviously looking to take deposits or lend into a market, it is really hard. Hence why we haven't seen a lot of market lending platforms, deploy global business models. They're pretty much lift and shift. And then it's a task in either partnering or hiring locals who've got a familiarity with the credit market and some of the nuance that's important. So I think that is another important consideration, is this natural sort of disposition towards local and global, depending on your business model. Again, the classic strategy questions, where to play, how to win. I think be really clear on what's distinctive and be really honest around that. And the other dimension, like anything, and we see this more prominently in Asia. I mean, we talk about it as one big market, but we just know there are significant differences when you travel throughout the region, and the same thing applies. And there's a lot of similarities. I think you touched on them already, Andy, around the regulatory philosophies are very similar, the legal frameworks, etc. But there are differences, and the competitive dynamic is somewhat different in some of the subsectors. So I think it is important, notwithstanding on face value, you may see something that's distinctive, that in reality, it actually is not going to be terribly distinctive. And so really struggling to articulate where is the enduring point of differentiation is really important. And then finally, just having a level of flexibility. I don't think every market will be the same, and you'll need to be alert to sort of differences that can help you get a foothold. And I think Joanne made a good point around finding partners that can help de-risk and accelerate your entry. And we certainly found that with a partner like Recordshop. But maybe I'll touch on that a little later as we get to the partnership part of the conversation. They're just some initial observations, Andy.
Fantastic, thanks, Ian. That's great, thank you. And I just try and move on to Matt, if you're there, Matt. Just to touch on briefly with Revolut, because as we mentioned, it's a very different play. In fact, you initially it's a B2C. I think you already had traction from customers, I guess, from Australia, and that kind of led you to the market. But obviously, there's a number of challenges and large campaigns which you had to deliver and get things moving, and also, I guess, on the licensing front, which we'll touch on in a minute with Basic. I don't know if you could just discuss that, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And sorry, I just dropped out there.
No problem.
I think I'm really proud of the fact that Australia was Revolut's kind of first expansion market outside Europe, and there are a couple of drivers for that. One, I think with global expansion, it's always a case of tracking a path where you can be confident that you're going to get some traction. In our case, Australia felt like a really familiar regulatory regime and market generally. So I think that was one, particularly playing in the payment space. We found a really supportive ecosystem. So whether that's across the regulators' openness to new entrants coming in, potential partners, which I think we'll touch on a little bit later in terms of their openness to dealing with us, our ability to secure talent, the role Fintech Australia plays, the role AusTrade plays in building connections, and things like the Fintech Bridge as well. So very supportive ecosystem. But I think third, and Ian touched on this, I think being confident about a consumer need that exists that you're able to meet. And I think in our case, we had a lot of really good groundwork done by the team in London, sort of as a sort of launch team. But we also found, and this is something that in some ways Revolut's learnt the hard way, is the importance of having strong teams on the ground in each market that it's looking to conquer. For that exact reason, really deeply understanding the competitive environment, the local market nuances, what consumers are after, how to engage regulators in the right way, how to have credibility in that engagement. That was one of the keys to really unlocking the market entry for Revolut in not just Australia and every other market that we've gone into, is putting strong executive team on the ground to define the go-to-market strategy, build the team and the licensing. I joined Revolut in February last year, and that was really, I remember the conversation with one of the founders, Nick, which was in his style. His marching orders to me were go and conquer your market, which I translated to build the best possible team that I could. We've been really buoyed in a lot of ways. Whilst Revolut is a kind of global brand, well known, the reality is it's a startup in Australia, but we've been able to attract some fantastic people. I think one of the best teams in the Aussie market. The second was securing our license, our Australian financial services license, and again, I probably joined at the back end of that process, but that can take some time, and I think whilst I said regulators are very open to new competition, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to drop standards for new entrants as they come in, and I think that's right. Actually, I think new entrants should be held to the same standard as everyone else operating in the environment. And then the third was localizing product, determining the sequencing and bringing that to market. And again, this is where local market knowledge was so critical. And in our case, we were looking at launching an FX oriented product midway through COVID, at the point that international travel had retreated, had gone from Australian being a country of prolific travellers and big import-export economy to virtually none of that happening. That required us to pivot pretty hard and really put the foot down on building a kind of broader feature set that people in Europe and UK would be more familiar with. So launching things like cryptocurrency and junior accounts, and then coming to market and building profile and beginning the journey of scaling up. But everything we've seen in terms of the progress we've made in Australia, the engagement we've had with the regulators, the traction we've had with consumers, I think it's sort of validated the decision to launch in the local market, and I think in a lot of ways gave us a lot of confidence to build what we have in terms of our presence globally. Build out in Singapore and Japan and the US, and scoping markets like Brazil and other parts of Latin America and Asia Pacific.
Fantastic, thanks for that. I guess for you guys as well, you're very much in your role, you're very much focused on Australia. So just for the audience, I mean, Australia in its own right has a big enough market that you've got plenty of work on your hands to tackle that. Because I know for some guys, they think of Australia, then they automatically think of the region. But I think that obviously demonstrates that something for record sure, getting the right partners, and there's a big enough consumer market and demand for product that Australia is a big enough market alone just to focus on, really. So, for example, with you guys, I don't think you're also tackling the New Zealand or Singapore. You already have a Singapore office, which that's standalone. So for you guys, it's very much Australia. I'm not sure about New Zealand. Are you also covering New Zealand? Or?
Yeah, it's a market we think is really attractive, and I think Australia is a natural jump-off point to places like that. We've also had, partly because of the high talent bar we were able to attract into the business, a number of our people are playing regional roles as well. So that sort of speaks to the quality of the talent on the ground. So yeah, we tend to pick the best from each operating business in the region to play sort of that more kind of leadership role from a regional point of view. But you're right. I think in terms of the size of the opportunity in Australia, probably an education part that I'm constantly on with my colleagues in HQ. You look at some very big markets like India and China, and even through Europe, which is more homogenous as a result of the common market and European licensing. I think Australia tends to be probably a smaller population, but heavily concentrated from a competition point of view. And you look at measures like return on equity. Australia tends to operate in the upper quartile as a result of the oligopolistic competitive environment, tend to be very wide margins relative to others. We saw those as genuinely attackable margins, something that Revolut could really go after. You take, for instance, foreign exchange. Australians pay one of the highest amounts of spread and fees on foreign exchange of anyone in the Western world. And so, whilst the absolute numbers in terms of population might be small, they're pretty deep profit pools. And again, for new entrants, I think coming with the right cost base and the right level of expertise and track records in another market, they're profit pools that can definitely be gone after, as it were.
That's right. Thanks, Matt. I think you touched on a key point as well, which was the licensing and the regulation approvals with ASIC. So I might just bring in Jonathan now, because Jonathan, for some of the audience, they won't have had an interaction with ASIC. They may be familiar with the FCA, but if you could just touch on a little bit the work you'd be doing with ASIC, but also, I guess, the key relationship with the FCA. And I think that'd be really valuable. Thank you.
Sure, Andy. Thank you for that. A quick background for what we do with ASIC. Specifically, in my case, I'm working the Innovation Hub. We are the touch point for fintech startups and scale-ups, as well as RegTech entities of a similar nature, wanting to enter and deal with ASIC in the Australian market. Our focus as a regulator is we are the conduct regulator. We work with the other regulators and can always facilitate referrals as well. Our focus in doing that is usually around encouraging financial technology and innovation. While as earlier themes have alluded to a couple of times, we don't compromise the core goals, and we have to maintain the mandate we are required to by government. So we try and help signpost the regime, explain it, demonstrate it, so that people can understand what they're looking to do. And for the people in this call who are coming from the UK, it will be a fairly familiar conversation. Though we're not exactly the same as the UK FCA, we are slightly different in our mandate. Fundamentally, there are a lot of similarities, and because of that, we do have a fairly regular contact, go through our normal fintech bridges, as well as our normal international multilateral agreements, things like the Global Financial Innovation Network or IOSCO, which is where all the conduct regulators talk to one another and coordinate things. Otherwise, I'd mention for us, a big part of our role is ensuring that the markets operate in a fair, orderly, and transparent way. As a result of that, we try and work with startups as well as existing players when they approach us around certain new technologies or new fintech undertakings or RegTech ones, so we can help facilitate better consumer outcomes. We've been doing this for some years. The focus has always been on delivering the better outcomes for the consumers, and we see facilitating this industry, whether it be people coming from overseas or the domestic industry, helps consumers get a more competitive, more feature-filled services and products within the market. This means we cover a range of different areas, and we remain open to helping people understand those areas, whether it be from a licensing perspective, whether it be from entering the market, or whether it be startup businesses just wanting to show us what they're doing, perhaps not seeking advice, but simply wishing to engage. And for that, I'd always encourage people to reach out to us. We have an application form on our website for those in the audience who wish to engage with us, or you can go through groups such as Innovate Finance or UK DIT. Is that a quick summary enough for you, Andy, or would you like me to go into a bit more detail on anything?
Oh, no, that's fantastic. Just a quick one, I guess, in terms of engagement as well. I mean, so with the FCA, and for those companies who've worked with the FCA, do you prefer in some instances that they go through the FCA contacts or as well? Would that be better?
Officially, we have always said we're happy to take referrals. Pragmatically, it's faster to just contact us directly. I find people reach out on LinkedIn or just email us, innovationhub@asic.gov.au, and people just go, yeah, we're dealing with it. And we can then reach out to the FCA if we need to. Obviously, both processes work, whichever works for the people you're dealing with. The advantage of going through the UK FCA is that you can then have the discussion with them, and then we can perhaps give clarity to us on some points around what you're doing that sometimes people on the ground can't always articulate as well as we'd like what their businesses are trying to do. We can help guide them, but clarity always helps.
Thank you. And I guess just to clarify as well, so for some of the guys on the call today who've engaged with the FCA, similar, ASIC are obviously working with incumbents in Australia, but they are keen, case by case to and you do obviously receive requests and engage with international companies of all sizes. So the fact we have SMEs here shouldn't put them off from engaging with you, should they? If that's correct?
Not at all. We're happy to, within reason. If you're one of the biggest banks in the country and you come in saying we don't know how to do financial services, that might be a bit of a worry. But SMEs, fintechs, whatnot, that should be fine.
Thank you. And as touched on one of the relationship with the FCA as well, obviously an important one for us on our work with DIT, and that really came to the fore with the Fintech Bridge agreement, which was signed back in 2018. And I guess what that's done for us as in AusTrade and DIT is really helped focus both markets, and from a practical sense, it has helped us in terms of our introductions, engagement, but also trade missions. I might touch on that in a little bit down the track, because I think Record, Sure and Revolut both have been part of the bridge, but also trade missions, and they can be a key enabler for market entry. And thanks, John, I really appreciate that. We'll come back in a minute. I might just bring in Philippa Martinelli from DIT now. So Philippa, thank you for your time. I wonder if you could just touch very briefly on, I guess, from your work, you work across a number of markets and helping UK high growth fintechs and scale ups. And just for your experience with Australia and how you found that, and any, I guess, trends you've seen with the companies you've been working with, and practical examples of companies you've supported.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so we've obviously been working together for more than 3 years since the Fintech Bridge was signed, and we see a huge amount of demand to expand between the UK and Australia. And over that time, obviously a lot of change in both markets when it comes to the approach to fintech at a policy and regulatory level. And I would echo Ian's comments about making sure for UK firms that you really do your homework and understand the dynamics of the Australian market and where you as a business fit into it, rather than just assuming the way that you operate in the UK will be sort of drag and dropped into the Australian market. There are obviously a lot of similarities, but I think appreciating the ways that the business is done and where you actually fit in that picture is really important. I would also say that Matt's really touched upon the ecosystem. I think it is a really supportive place to do business. I think there's a lot that you can do remotely, sort of bearing in mind that difficulty of travel right now, and obviously Andy, our trade missions all being virtual for the time being, unfortunately. But I think there's a huge amount of groundwork that you can lay, both talking with businesses in the Australian market virtually, but also talking to those that have been on that journey themselves. And we've, over the last 3+ years, having more than 70 firms expand between the UK and Australia, about 50% of that from the UK into Oz, and 50% in the other direction. Those are businesses that, because of this kind of network, because of this ecosystem, and because of practical support mechanisms like the Export Academy that we've launched, that supports sort of direct one-to-one professional services assistance for UK firms trying to understand and develop their market entry strategy into Australia. A huge amount of opportunity there to sort of gain the right knowledge before you set foot in the market. I think also just keeping abreast of, depending on where you are in the subsectors of fintech, things like the evolution of the consumer data right, the Senate inquiry into financial regulatory technology, and obviously the broader Senate committee work that's ongoing. There's a huge amount developing there, and you're still in. Sorry, I think I froze there. And obviously the agreement in principle runs the FTA, so a lot that we're trying to do there to again open that channel up more to work around things like data localization issues, and also to ensure that both financial services and innovation are enshrined in that work. So a lot going on, a lot of support, but again, I think really doing your homework is essential there. And when we look at firms that have expanded between the two, obviously we have a couple on the line today, but the likes of TrueLayer, of Trade Ledger, of 10x, a lot of very successful companies of Wise, expanding between the two markets. And really, I think that's a great community of people that are generally, and I'll leave Joanne and Matt to give their comments on this, but I think generally are willing to share those experiences. And the more that you can connect with businesses that have done that, I think it's really valuable.
Thanks for that. That's a good point. I think there are some really good networks, and happy to introduce you. As mentioned earlier, Fintech Australia, I guess the counterpart of Innovate Finance is one good network. You've got the Australian Chamber working for our sales, state government partners. Happy to introduce and connect you to whether it's your local partners or potential partners. It's definitely, we find a collaborative and open community, and certainly events are always a good when they take place in person. At the moment, obviously virtually, but they're also a good way of meeting. And we have led trade missions around Intersect and some of the larger events in Australia, and hopefully that will continue. And DIT have been a great supporter and have led on a number of those missions, and we're very fortunate to be able to work with Philippa and her colleagues on that. Thanks, Philippa. And I think we'll just go back quickly. If I just go back very briefly to Joanne and to Matt, a couple of queries around, I guess, in terms of when you're first in the market, when recruiting is obviously perhaps the biggest challenge. And I don't know if not an easy one. I don't know if Joanne, perhaps, I guess you've got the partnership with KPMG, which helps there, but I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that and how you've managed to deal with that challenge from the UK when you're so far away.
Thanks, Andy. I mean, Matt nailed it. I think the challenge is, having access to the right talent in the market and really spending sort of not scrimping on talent is really important when they're trying to grow a market. I think for any, if you're a Revolut, it's one thing where you're well capitalized, and if you're a startup, it's very different. We've got quite a few SMEs on this round table, and it's how do you balance the challenge of wanting to enter a market, but obviously perhaps not having the backing of a Revolut. And so you have to carefully trade off what are you going to do from the UK, what are you going to provide on the ground. And Andy, you mentioned the partnership thing. We've been fortunate that some of the things that we would have had to put on the ground have been provided by our partners. But obviously we are constantly trading off, could we go faster if we had more people on the ground? And it's just the usual startup scale up challenges. And it doesn't change whether you're entering this market or any other market, but it's really important. And Philippa mentioned the Fintech Bridge and the resources that are available. We were on the Fintech Bridge, and it was really helpful because we got access to lots of different organisations, and to the point where we were asked, who do you want to meet in the Australian market? Well, whoever asked you that question, and literally. Colleagues would write out to the head of X insurance company or the head of Y bank and say, would you meet this startup, this regulation startup? And they'd say yes. And it was unbelievable the amount of access that we got just by having relationships with AusTrade and DIT and being on the Fintech Bridge. That is invaluable. And I guess what I would say for anybody who's thinking about Australia, it's a well-trodden path. You don't need to reinvent a wheel. There's loads of resources out there. There's lots of information that you can draw upon. There's a great report I think AusTrade did in 2021 about the benchmark of Australia. There's lots of information. So draw upon the networks. It's very easy. And what I think is quite interesting is Australians will give you a meeting in a way that perhaps the people in the UK won't. It's quite interesting. But you can literally get meetings with the right people, with the decision makers, very easily if you draw upon those networks. So that would be my key takeaway.
Great, thanks, John. And then Matt, just with you guys, and I guess now you're on the ground as country manager, but how have you found that relationship and the challenges of being far away from the UK and but also recruiting as well? I know in the past as well, we have worked with companies who've gone for a hybrid model, which has worked well. They've sent people down from the UK who've helped grow the team, they've helped bring that culture and understanding, but then they've looked very much to recruit a local team. So I guess that's another way which we see companies doing a good job and managing that process as well.
Yeah, I think in some ways the last 18 months has been a unique challenge in that typically the way Revolut would work it is hire the talent locally and then look to immerse them in the HQ to build those relationships and deeply understand the way the culture and the business works. That's been much more difficult given you sort of can't put people on planes. But what it's meant is you need to connect in different ways. And probably the part I wouldn't say I underestimated it, but the reality is you are sort of 10,000 miles away, and you need to ensure that you stay fairly present in your colleagues' kind of run of what's going on, and stay in the rhythm of the business. But by the same token, we're in a fortunate position to be given a lot of latitude to hire the team, secure the license, localize the product, get going on the scaling. And so it's that balance between ensuring that you're staying within the orbit and the rhythm of the org back in the UK, but at the same time, very clear set of marching orders I had around what we wanted to try and achieve in Australia. So it's probably a blend of those two things. I think overall, in terms of talent, as I said, I know the Aussie market pretty well, been here sort of 20 years in financial services, but I've been surprised on the upside in the quality of people coming in, because it's in some ways it's not a straightforward brief, because typically we'd go looking for people who have had a good foundation in banking or payments, but also being exposed to a much more dynamic environment than a traditional bank. And the quality of operations managers, in Revolut's world, they tend to have a really good blend of strategy and operations, and great executioners and program managers, but even down into the risk and compliance skill sets, AML. I think there are really good quality people in the Aussie market, and I think we're in this unique position, certainly in the last 12 months, of fintechs being a really attractive opportunity for people who are looking at stepping out of either a traditional bank or looking for a different sort of experience. So as I said, I've been really buoyed on the upside around the quality of talent. And just to kind of reiterate my earlier message, we found having boots on the ground the key to sort of unlocking the opportunity. I just wouldn't stress enough how important that is. And yeah, Joanne's right. It's always a balance. And I'd love to be able to say that the point we were launching, because we clearly had the backing of Revolut, but very much still a startup mentality as we came into the market. And I think that's super critical as well. But I definitely wouldn't underestimate the importance of getting talent on the ground.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. I think one of the things we found, and we're fortunate with UK Australia, is a number of Australians who have had that experience also of working in London and connections across the UK going back to Australia. And that's been invaluable for some UK companies who then hired them as their country heads or in senior roles. And I think that's the flow of people in both directions actually as well, in terms of recruitment and also in opening doors as well. We found that quite invaluable. And I think that comes back to the point made earlier about the connections and ecosystems, because there's a lot of people who've worked in both markets with some great knowledge and skills, and they can be valuable for in terms of hiring new teams or looking for new partnerships. Ian, I'll just very briefly, and we might open up for a couple of questions. Just you're with KPMG, you've done some really interesting work in this area, and again, the talent one, I think there's a perception that Australia perhaps doesn't have a wider pool of talent, or the labour is quite high, but you've done some interesting work recently which kind of dispels that to a certain degree. I wonder if you could just touch quite briefly on that, and just from the work you've done with KPMG, how you see the talent issue in Australia. Yeah,
look, I think it's getting more challenging. I know Matt and I have had this conversation. I remember going to Revolut in Canary Wharf and meeting, I felt very old as soon as I walked into the building. But what just struck me was just the impressive intellect, really high quality of individuals that Revolut had. And, I know we've got some phenomenally talented Australians, and I think that's sort of testament with some of the businesses that have launched and scaled internationally. But I think it is true that we've got perhaps more shallow depth in certain areas, and I think that'll happen. I mean, when we started the sort of this more contemporary context of fintech, we had sort of 60 odd fintech companies in the country, and nowhere near the sort of depth that we see in the UK or other places. So certainly now with the sort of 700 strong, and I think it's sort of the numbers are fine to a point, but I think it's also just the quality of some of those businesses, and certainly are well proven now. So, but it is really hard. I mean, I think every business you talk to in Australia is really struggling in terms of supply side, finding the right people, and I think that just reinforces the importance of thinking a little laterally around partnerships. It is just super hard to attract and then retain talent as well. And I think the other big challenge, and I think Matt touched on it, where there's no shortage of bankers who you talk to who want to get into fintech, and then you talk to them about, are they prepared to take sort of a 90% cut in salary, and we quickly move on to other opportunities at other banks. So it is one where there's sort of this allure, but there's a reality as well. And I think Matt also referred to it. You need to find individuals who are going to be able to adapt in a very, very dynamic environment. And it's not for everyone, but there are also a lot of opportunities, as you say, people coming out of compliance, risk roles, really high quality people that can offer something important to fintech companies. So it is a little horses for courses. It depends on the business and the skill set you're looking to bring in. But I know that some of the founders, some of the entrepreneurs in Oz are as good as anywhere in the world. And we've got some really good emerging proof points around that. So yeah, I think it's sort of onwards and upwards. But I think the thing I would like to see, and I think this is the challenge / opportunity, is how do we now start to create world-class businesses? And I think we're starting to see that in some categories already. But I think that's the next sort of challenge / opportunity for the Australian fintech market, and I dare say for the UK market as well. I mean, enormous potential in some players there, and I think now, and particularly in some of these subsectors, I suspect we will see the rise to the top of certain players. And if anything, in some of these markets, you will see a greater concentration around number 1 and 2 in each market, as the players that have established themselves really then scale into dominant players. I think is what we're going to see in the UK and Australia.
Great, thanks, Ian. And just to cover quite a bit of ground here, and thanks to the panelists. So, from the audience, is there any immediate questions? Has anyone got any queries or questions from the topics and areas we've just covered in the last half an hour? Is there anything anyone wants to address now? Or if not, then we can move on to partnerships and collaborations. But feel free to shout out.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Thank you. Sorry, who's this? Sorry.
It's Daniel Lane from QB Systems.
Great, thanks, Dan. Thank you.
So, first of all, thanks to everyone. It's been really insightful, and just wondering what the panelists' take is on B2B fintech in the Australian market.
Thanks, Daniel. I'll go, I guess, Ian, so I'll kick off with you if that's okay. If you've got any thoughts.
Yeah, can I just pick up, just make sure I get the lens on that question right? When you say analysts, what do you...
Oh, sorry, I said panelists.
Oh, but, panelists, sorry. Okay.
That's okay.
Just repeat the question then, Daniel, just make sure I got it correctly.
So we're a B2B fintech that's looking to move into the Australian market. Mm-hmm. So just interested in any experiences of how the B2B fintech scene is in Australia.
Yeah, I certainly feel we've there's been a shift in probably attention to B2B. I think that's sort of a generalization. Some that may have tried to prosecute a B2C have found it pretty hard, and so potentially the partnership opportunity. And I also think it's a reflection. Joanne touched on the Royal Commission, but I think that the reality is, it's not sort of a feasibility question. I think most banks would see themselves as having an ability to build something. At some point they'll get there. To me, it's really the cost and time to get there, and I think the ability to accelerate. I just think the window is closing on some, and I think COVID's been an accelerator in that context. So players that are looking to, and this is incumbents, that is incumbent players that are looking to fill a capability gap, I think the penny's dropped that they're not going to build their way to it if they want to get there quickly. And nothing's ever an out of the box, nothing's ever 100%. But if you can, bank sort of 70% of a solution that gets you there and you build, the delta, then I think that makes a lot more sense. So I certainly feel the incumbent community is a lot more open to B2B. And, I think in recognition of that, we're seeing some more successes out of B2B players, both domestic and globally, coming to Australia. And I suspect we'll see a lot more activity in that part of the market.
Thanks, Ian. And just in terms of that, we have seen some interesting ones recently where 10x with Westpac, Rails Bank and Volt Bank, and others as well. And obviously, as Joanne's mentioned, Recordsure working with Ian and colleagues at KPMG. So there's some good examples, and it's definitely a growth area and something we've seen more in the last couple of years, I'd say. Thanks, Ian. Is there any other questions at this point? If not, because I know time is against us, we'll move quickly on to collaborations. That's I guess, as just mentioned, it's an interesting area, and for some, is a driver for market entry. And Recordsure and their partnership with Ian and colleagues at KPMG is obviously, that's really helped them in terms of market entry. But just, I guess, more broadly, in terms of, and that maybe with Revolut, in terms of partnering or having to collaborate and partner in some instances with some of the banks or incumbents, how does that go? And I guess as a new entrant to the market, that's always a challenge in terms of credibility and trying to work with what are big corporations, not always the easiest to engage and to collaborate with. Have you any, I guess, insights from that or any thoughts on how to go there?
Yeah, I think Ian made the point earlier that the incumbents are far more open to partnering with fintechs than they ever were, even where there's potential for there to be some direct competition in the same market. So I think they see the benefits of probably having their brand associated with faster moving organization, what their people themselves learn from, again, working closely with local partners, and also a bit of the mindset of, well, if we don't partner with them, someone else is going to, in which case, we've lost that opportunity. So we've seen a sort of change in the cycle a little around that. I think bank partners in particular, for most people on the call, that's going to be a key enabler to get in place, and one that I would highly recommend front running. So going out and talking to the banks, I think, through the combination of AusTrade, Fintech Australia, DTI, Chamber of Commerce, I think, as Joanne mentioned, it is relatively easy to get in front of the banks. Most of them have innovation units of some sort that they'll have that conversation. I think that some of the things to flush out early on is obviously risk appetite, and I think for players like remittance offerers, that can be reasonably challenging conversations. And again, probably one of the drivers of that is the regulatory landscape that we're operating in, which is we've just come out of a pretty bruising Royal Commission for traditional banks, and you can combine that with pretty active regulators on the supervision side, particularly AUSTRAC, with some very, very large actions that they've had against the incumbent bank. So I think that's probably flavoured their risk appetite a little bit. I think, speaking from Revolut's point of view, we've had a partnership with an existing bank. That's all worked very smoothly. I think, and I don't think they'd mind me saying this, often where the friction might come is the pace at which a fintech will want to move versus the pace that traditional banks will tend to move to a little bit as well. They tend to have maybe heavier governance cycles and committee structures that need to be navigated around. But overall, we've been able to facilitate the offering to our customers come to market hasn't been a constraint, and one we'd see ourselves continue to build on.
I'd concur with that, Matt. Actually, you've mentioned about the agility. Most B2B businesses, fintech businesses, are generally agile. That's what they create, but they need to really focus on security, because they're having conversations with those major banks, with neobanks, with traditional banks, and information security is key. So you might have the best technology in the world, but if it's not secure, nobody's going to touch it. So spend time making sure that that's important and it's focused on. And when you're having those conversations and collaborations with the banks, let them know that you've got the credentials in this area and you understand the pain points, because whilst everybody's willing to be more innovative, they've still got this underlying deep mistrust of new organizations coming in. So you have to balance that up. So with innovation and security is crucial.
Thank you. I know from DIT, Philippa, you guys will be doing a new program which I guess is trying to help in this area, which is a bit leading edge, which if you could touch on briefly, that might be useful for some of the guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on some really important issues around how does an early stage firm build credibility in the new market. And I think the more that you can do with existing relationships and with existing partners to share their experience of working with you to build that credibility as you go into the new market, I think that's really key. And in the UK, a lot of people will be familiar with sort of third-party outsourcing guidelines from regulators. Maybe Jonathan will want to touch on that afterwards, but I think that's something to be aware of, how regulators view outsourcing at the financial institutions you're trying to sell into. One of the things that we've launched, Sandy said, is Leading Edge Global Partnerships, which is an international program, but it's about trying to understand through our partnerships with large financial institutions what their technology needs are and what sort of solutions they're looking for and what the criteria are that they're looking for in a fintech, and then trying to facilitate that pipeline of UK firms that can address some of those needs. So we launched this first in Singapore. We're expanding it into the Australian market. So working with those initially large banks, but expanding that out across broader financial institutions to say, what is it that you're looking for? What are the sub-verticals that you're really particularly interested in, where you have risk appetite, where you have ultimately budget and resource to deploy on sourcing and implementing those solutions, so that we can then broker those relationships with UK firms that we know are credible, are partnership ready, to try and address some of those challenges, particularly in a virtual world. And AusTrade have been great in working with us on that so far.
Thank you. I think just to add, some of the banks in terms of engagement, most of the big Australian banks all have a big UK presence, so that's something to consider. Most have innovation labs, and also some have venture innovation arms. If I think of NAB Ventures, I think recently invested in a couple of UK companies, and Digital Shadows, who I guess are more cyber, but they're one example. So they are open to engagement, but I guess you just have to consider how do you approach, who's the best contact points, and maybe that's something which we can help on, along with Philippa and other colleagues as well. Jonathan, just from ASIC's side, is there anything you wanted to touch on here, anything which we should address?
I was actually just thinking through those last few comments since Daniel's question, that one of the interesting things we see via the Innovation Hub is people do approach us, whether it be local or international, who are looking to get or build their client base. Now, as a regulator, it's not our case to facilitate actual networking. That's something you'll work through yourselves, the industry bodies and many of the bodies on this line here. One of the observations I would make, though, in terms of you thinking about what you can offer, is trying to understand what the customer actually needs. And the reason I say that is we see a lot of stuff come through, and I end up bringing aside, do teaching on this stuff outside ASIC. A lot of people come and try and sell what they want to sell to institutions. So it might be a question with one bank says, we want a B2B solution because we want it branded as a white label solution that we will offer. Someone else is quite happy for the bank to stand behind you and be invisible, and you are the front end doing B2C. So what is useful, I think, in entering any market, in particular an Australian market, where there are existing players who will have a view on how things should be done, and it's not going to be consistent, that you need to understand what your clients actually need. Things like the regulatory frameworks, that's all stuff you can sort of build around in due course. I don't think you want to build for just the regulatory framework. Things like there is outsourcing obligations, CP 232 from one of my colleagues at APRA, that sort of thing will come into play. That's more the icing on the cake. You actually want to have the right cake in the first place. So think about how you want to build and how you want to enter the market. come in with solutions that work for clients, you might find it a lot easier to have those conversations, because I am aware from having dealt with now 600 plus fintechs formally and many more informally, that a lot of people will find it hard to get their first few customers. Obviously, when you have a proven track record, it's a lot easier. But when you are coming into these areas, if you can offer someone a solution to a problem they have, they're much more interested in talking to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Fantastic. Has anyone got any additional questions just before we move on to this?
Yes.
Thank you.
So my name is Thomas Rappold. I'm the CEO of Divisend, and we offer the first worldwide platform for reclaiming foreign withholding taxes. And this is also for Australia a very interesting thing. So, for example, we come from Germany, and we covered that Australia has around 50% more dividend payments per year than Germany, although your population is just 1/3 of Germany. So it's, as you have so many raw material companies, infrastructure and railway companies, and that's something very interesting, I think, for you. We had some, it's difficult to tackle the market. We know we rely on open banking APIs, and the regulator in Australia, they are very straightforward. As there's also not only the payment thing like in Europe with so-called PSD2 mandatory, but that you have also looking for other assets like securities, loans, and so on. So it sounds a very progressive infrastructure. We are already in Singapore with business, and we think Australia is a perfect market. So for this business. And I think there are 3-4 main banks players, and you mentioned that they offer accelerating programs. So for us, is it interesting to know more about the banking APIs to some leading banks or get access? Because from outside, it's quite difficult to get access because they get so many LinkedIn questionnaires that they don't answer there. And we are already pretty international on many markets. And look for a good market entry. And Australia is one of our top markets, but difficult to tackle that. And would you be there open then later on that we can do a follow-up and can give you a demo or tell you more that what our requirements are, that we get some guidance into the market? What would be there the process?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to share my contact details, and we can have a separate call afterwards and discuss more. But actually, that's a good segue, because in terms of opportunities, we're moving nicely now into open banking. That's one of the areas where we are seeing interest, certainly from a few UK operators, and Australia with the consumer data rights, and slowly that's an area we're seeing more interest in. I think, Ian, if I could just bring you in now with KPMG, just in terms of opportunities, I think we've got digital banking platforms, RegTech, and open banking is some of the key areas. I wonder if you could just
that's great. We work with KPMG, for example, in Luxembourg already together. So we have so that sounds pretty good. So it's for us always to find the needle. So the first point in the market, and Australia is terrific, interesting, and also the dividends. Things are growing because of your big raw material boom. So it's just a starting point of a new bull market in dividend payments, and it's already big with 75 billion Australian dollars. And
yeah, we're perhaps easier because of time now. We can follow up. I'll send my details. Thanks, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks for the question. Thanks. Ian, is that okay? Just if we just look conscious of time now, just a few of the opportunities. I think open banking is an interesting one, isn't it? With what's happening in Australia.
Yeah, look, and certainly the framework broadly is very similar to the UK. I think obviously there are some distinct differences, and one of those is we launched open banking last year, but we didn't start with payment initiation. It was information exchange, but we will no doubt usher in payment initiation over the coming 12-18 months. I think what is interesting though, certainly when the Competition Markets Authority in the UK launched open banking, you had I think 9 banks at the beginning. Well, certainly, and it's been more staged, but all banks in Australia will be subject to open banking. So that's certainly for those of you in the B2B or enabling space, a great market opportunity, because it's something that will be mandated and it's just being phased across the major banks and then all other deposit-taking institutions and different product sets every 6 months. The other more interesting opportunity is, which certainly is a step beyond where the UK is, but no doubt where the UK is going, and you hear a lot more about open finance in the UK, not just open banking, but certainly in Australia with the Consumer Data Right being the overarching legislative framework that's seen the introduction of open banking. And we've seen the federal government also commit more funding to the extension of the Consumer Data Right to other sectors. You know, we've got energy that's currently under consultation. No doubt we'll see, you know, telco and internet service provision. You'll have insurance and super. I think the exciting thing for both consumers, households, as well as businesses, these are all major category spend areas. And so, you know, as a lot of people are doing it tough through COVID, you know, I think having the ability to draw on third parties, whether that's a bank, a fintech, or even other providers, to be able to help inform consumers, households, and businesses in getting better deals, I think is a really important opportunity for the users of the industry. And so I think that's an important opportunity. And so no doubt there are opportunities for UK FinTechs that are now well and truly you know, capitalizing on open banking in the UK, the ability to bring that here, but then also to extend their business models into other sectors is certainly one that no doubt will then bring them opportunities to bring that to the UK and other markets as well. So again, a lot of parallels, but some differences. But I think I suspect if we're sort of talking in 3 or 4 years' time, there'll be quite a convergence around this spreading across other sectors and also having payment initiation, also a feature set within open banking.
We have, for example, deep knowledge on securities, and are part of the Open Wealth Association in Switzerland, which pushes that forward, and also in UK, where the new standard TISA is coming up, so for open savings and open finance, and in Singapore with SG FinTechs, also highly related on other assets than just payments. So this is something also we can bring to the table, and it sounds that Australia, they're very progressive in the roadmap and what's coming up there on open banking, so above payment. So really, it would be really great to share that further on. Great, thank you.
Yeah, we will. We can pass that across to you. Thank you. I just want to, Matt, from your experience with Revolut, is there any things you're seeing on the ground there? We talked briefly about digital banking platforms. Payments is honestly pretty mature, but RegTech we've seen growth in as well. Is there anything else you're seeing?
Oh, look, I think, you know, there's a number of areas where you know, consumers, small businesses are underserved by existing players. I think you know, the small business market, the SME market, is definitely one that's heating up in terms of focus from incumbent banks. But you know, historically, that's been a sector of the economy that's been pretty woefully underserved. And you know, I think for fintechs who play in that space, I think that's a really interesting one. I think open banking overall is a really strong statement of intent from policymakers in Australia about their desire to level the playing field and open the market up to new entrants. And you know, that combined with, you know, restricted ADI regimes, you know, banking we've touched on. You know, there's a Senate consultation around, you know, cryptocurrency, potentially creating that as a bit of a hub in Australia, as well as, you know, staring into issues around debanking and the like. So I think they're really good signals in the policymakers in Australia that you know, that we're serious about bringing new entrants in. And then, you know, as I said at the start, I think, yeah, we've founded a really open ecosystem from that point of view. So yeah, I think yeah, there's definitely some deep opportunities in the local market.
Thank you. And I think I know our panelists are very grateful, some of whom are still in Australia, and it's getting late in the evening there, and others in the UK obviously early and about to start the day. So we're just shortly going to wrap up now. And again, real appreciation to all our panelists. Thank you for your time. particularly to you guys in Australia, and Philippa in the UK, Joanne in the UK as well. Thank you, and Peter and to guys at Innovate Finance. Thanks for hosting it and for organising today. From our side, happy to share my contact details and to follow up with individual questions and companies, particularly those of you who have a real interest in learning and understanding more about the Australian market and where there may be opportunities for you. And we can look at that with some of the work and reports we have, but also through some of our contacts and connections. Hopefully we can help you as you look to explore more. So from us in AusTrade, that's it. Thank you, Peter. I don't know if you guys need to send anything now from Innovate Finance, but again, thanks to you for hosting today, and again to the panelists, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.